Hey guys, what's going on? This is the PGA podcast here at Fantasy Labs. A little bit different than normal. We have Brian stepping out this week for vacation, but Colin and I are back. I'm Peter Jennings. I go by CSU Ram 88 across the DFS industry, and a lot of interesting stuff going on in golf. I want to start the pod by kind of recapping the Players Championship, Colin. The results of the players are interesting, but just the process and just seeing some other sharp players, I have some questions about the whole thing. So I guess what were your initial thoughts on the Players Championship before we dive into the Byron Nelson Championship?
So I thought it was funny that Players was my big stand of all right, I finally figured out how I'm going to weight course history, and Sawgrass is perfectly set up for a great course history course. And then all of your big course horses kind of underperformed this week. Sergio did okay, but not his usual top 10. Stenson, the other one, just bombed and missed the cut. Zach Johnson kind of underperformed. So I was left with more questions than answers than when I went into going with course history, because I thought I had it figured out, and now I'm okay, let's go back to the drawing board. The first idle question I have, and this is speculative at this point, is when all of the big hitters on course history all underperform, is there some condition where basically Sawgrass is no longer Sawgrass and course history is not the weight that it usually gets? I think in theory, course history is a floating weight where you can weight it according to if you had perfect information, you'd know exactly how to weight it every week. And given that all of the big course history guys failed, is there some condition where we should have picked up on where, all right, weight course history a little bit less this week. Sawgrass played a little bit easier in the first two rounds. I don't know if those two are connected, but that's kind of a potential area of investigation. When do you think, for example, that we might let course history less going into a tournament?
All right, well, I'm going to go back because I do think there are a lot of variables, and I know you're not a big watcher in general of golf, but I think this week specifically had a couple of things happen that kind of changed the course and just how, if you look at the results, I mean, the guys you just mentioned, Saturday was the really killer, and everyone really struggled on Saturday. So basically, the tournament started off really easy. The greens were really soft and receptive. And, Jason Day shot 63 on Thursday. Rory McIlroy shot 64 on Friday. People are just crushing the course. So inevitably, the people who are managing the course really tried to suck out the moisture out of the greens and make it a lot tougher. And on Saturday, we ended up with what most announcers and players deemed as one of the hardest rounds of golf they've ever played. And that's when Zach Johnson shot an 80. Sergio had a 6-putt on a hole or a 5-putt on a hole from 12 feet, just something ridiculous. Really, it changed the dynamics of the entire course. So I think it's a little bit of an outlier looking at what happened on Saturday. Obviously, Russell Knox, who we'll talk about a little bit more later, he had that big, score on 17, which had nothing to do with the greens. That was all him. But for the most part, all the golfers that we were on really struggled on Saturday. And it's one of those things. I mean, the greens, I watched it. Jason Day even had a 4-putt from 10 feet. He had a birdie putt up the hill that was really, not a tough birdie putt it past, and then 3-putted from 4 feet. And he was lucky not to 5 or 6 putt, honestly. So it's one of those things where I think there's a little more variance in this specific tournament, especially with Saturday, how you played. Duke, this guy was ranked, in the 400s in the world, shot 65. And a lot of people are saying that's one of the best rounds on tour all year. So it's one of those weird things where I'm not really taking into account this year with course history relative to others, because even the beginning days, Thursday, Friday, where we saw these people put up ridiculous scores, there's no wind and the greens were super, super soft, way softer than the course wanted it. So I think it played a lot different than it has in years past, is the long story short. And I've done a lot of evaluation on course history myself, and I think we'll continue to dive into that and what type of course history really matters. So that's a long-winded response, but did you know of the conditions on Saturday, Colin?
No, I didn't look at any of the actual playing conditions. I just kind of saw that the scores themselves were kind of funny, and just from checking in occasionally in the leaderboard, something just felt off. in terms of like, this doesn't feel like typical sawgrass from a data end. My only open question is there anything that we could have known before the tournament started that says this is not going to be usual sawgrass? Like a gimme examples, maybe like when Augusta played at like what, 60 degrees that year Zach Johnson won, you can probably think that like, okay, maybe don't, like that would be a logical don't wait course history as much this week. What you do wait, I don't know, that's like indeterminate, like, but I think that it'd be good to think of like, I don't know what I would have seen that's different about sawgrass, like going in weather-wise, or are they in a drought or something, or
There's
like
nothing. They literally so basically what happened was, because there was no wind, the greens were soft, and the other thing that's important is they're completely redoing the greens after the tournament. So there's all these variables that led to the incredible scoring conditions, which doesn't explain Stenson. I mean, Stenson went out on Thursday morning when Day shot the 63, when everyone was going very, very low, and put up, whatever, a 5 over 77, which was just, 10 strokes, 9 strokes, some ridiculous.
Yeah, I have no explanation for Stenson. That was just such a weird one.
No one does. He was 50% owned in the Thunderdome. You look at every sharp player in DFS, everyone had him. He was a lock, and he just didn't perform. So I'm just throwing that out, just random. Who knows what happened there? But what is explainable is what happened the first 2 days with the low scoring, and then Saturday being just a ridiculously hard day. And you go back and look on YouTube. Sergio just kept missing the same putt. He had a 3-foot putt and he 4-putted it from 3 feet. I mean, it was just like the greens were glass. The announcers were saying they had never seen faster greens in their entire life. I mean, Johnny Miller says that, who's been around the golf game for 30 years, 40 years, and he says he's never seen faster greens in his life. I mean, it happens. Zach Johnson is known as an absolute grinder on tour, and he shot an 80 on Saturday. So I'm not going to take too much into account. I know it's probably bothering you, and I think that it's such an outlier to see the conditions the way they were on Saturday that you have to kind of throw it out.
Yeah, and I think the best you can hope for going forward is maybe have some sort of process to figure out what's an outlier course history year and what's a normal course history year, either from like change from scoring average, change in wind condition, change in temperature. Ideally, you should maybe like the further it gets from typical, and you need at least some sort of good baseline of like what constitutes typical. So you almost need like history before course history to figure out like what's typical. Then maybe you can start figuring out how to weight prior results essentially for course history. Because right now they're just kind of all like piled together and said like all tournaments are equal. That's definitely a question on my mind this week for different reasons, but we'll get into that. But yeah, more questions than answers. The only other one, the angle that I want to consider is going forward, it's not necessarily a given to me that course history, even if you can quantify it, has to be weighted the same for all courses. I think in the abstract, maybe certain courses benefit from experience and memory more than others. I don't think that's an unreasonable line to take. And so far, kind of initially poking around it, that kind of bears out in the data where certain good course histories or like course history is worth more at other courses than like other ones. And as long as you can see that, like I think moving away from a one size fits all rule for here's how you weight course history is probably going to be a source of edge, because like not only do you have to quantify that well in order to play that angle, but you have to have basically our data source and be willing to sit through like every single course and be like, okay, how are they all different? I know that it gets really close to basically overfitting and trying to like say like the more specific you get, that like in terms of what you want to weight for every course, the more you open yourself up to fitting to noise. But this is about probably the frontier where I'm like, it has that like good trade-off between the risk of fitting to noise versus like what actually is true about how to weight course history. I feel like that's about the right sweet spot. Do you agree in theory that course history can play or can be weighted differently at different courses?
I'm so happy to hear you say that. I mean, I've been quietly, I don't want to say preaching that, but kind of arguing that when you talk about some place like Augusta with the Masters and some of these other courses where I say, hey, I'm going to weight course history more. And I absolutely think it's the case. I think that you can look at certain tournaments and certain courses and say, hey, there's really a lot of value in having great experience and history here. And there's other courses where it doesn't matter that much. So I think it's one of those things where you have to weight it differently each week. And really happy to hear you say that. And hopefully we can kind of identify some of these courses where you want to weigh it more or weight it more in general. So I'm on the same page as you there, and really trying to find, the edges where they are. Is this course, something where you should weight history pretty heavily, or should you not? And then more importantly with that too, I think that we can also look at specific golfers. I think you and I talked about last week, and I think we'll, tend to agree on this, is what type of course history works well, and then what type of course history is really important at certain courses, and then how much to weight it based on how important we think course history is. So I think there's a lot of variables there. I think there's so much to do with just other stats and course fit and current form and long-term adjusted round that really matter as well. But I do think this course history angle is something that is really important to crack, and hopefully we can get better at that throughout the year.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that would actually be a fun exercise where I give a data answer as far as which course history is, like where course history is more or less important. You come up with what you think the list should be, and then we see where we differ. Right. That would be an interesting one going forward, I think. So maybe we'll figure something like that out. Interestingly enough, Sawgrass, I went back and looked at it, and there was a case for me maybe weighting course history a little bit too much there. And that is even before like this week's results. I don't think it would have been enough to get me off Stenson, for example. He was still, like, everybody was still on him. But maybe, like, there are some other downstream decisions. Like, I went through pains to get Kuchar and Zach Johnson on my team as well. Like, yeah, Kuchar happened to pay off, Zach Johnson not so much. But that, like, I struggled with fitting in the 5 and 6 guys there. So maybe I was too constrained in my approach and trying to really build up course history when I should have weighted a little bit less. I don't know. I think that whatever gets you the best like set of rules for basically all tournaments, as long as you can fit it out, as long as it improves your accuracy, that should come out in the data. So at least that I have a kind of a guiding light for, are these decisions correct, yes or no?
Right. And I think that you had a couple of really important points there, and we don't want to be too results oriented. Like Stenson, he was a lock. He sucked. He ruined teams, but that is what it is. Like, I'm not going to, like, certain decisions I look back on, I'm like, maybe I could have thought through this more. Maybe I made a mistake here. Stenson, no.
Yeah, there's no way I was getting off Stenson.
Right. I'm completely comfortable with that pick. I have no regrets on it. Zach Johnson, I actually feel the same way. I think his course history is so elite. Course fit was great. I thought he was a lock as well. So I have no qualms there. And really, you look at his Thursday, Friday, and then you look at what happened on Saturday, and that just sucked the wind out of his sails. And that's not what that's not the course that we're used to. So I think the variables and what happened with how, the people who manage the course, from just in terms of the greens and all that stuff, the way they changed the course for Saturday, they are expecting less wind. They were expecting more humidity. They even said that on the telecast. They really changed the course, which impacted the scoring. I mean, the average score on Saturday was close to 76. The average score the first 2 days was like 70 to 71. Yeah, so it's five shots harder. It's just absolutely insane.
That's insane.
Yeah. So I don't feel bad about it. I think ZJ, the process was there. And that's what we're really trying to do here at Fantasy Labs. We're trying to help you guys with the process. And it's really easy to get caught up in the results. It's really easy to have short-term bias. I'm victim of that all the time myself. But, if you're looking at it objectively, you have to remove that bias and just trust the process. And that's what we're trying to get better at. So I think we're on the right page here. Talking about the Byron Nelson Championship moving forward. We'll talk a little bit more about course history in a second, but let's talk course fit and what we're looking for here. What have you noticed about the course, Colin?
Very little, to be honest. So I ran first course fit, and it's probably one of the weakest course fits that I have so far. The only thing that pops, and like, it's to give you a point of reference, it's maybe like a quarter of the strength of like your typical course fit. And the only thing that pops so far is putting, of all things, which never pops for anything. It's a weak connection. It's the only thing that's correlating with like plus or minus. And it was bothering me all week until kind of I did some Googling. And then like this course may be my nightmare scenario because there was a redesign smack in the middle of the course history right around 2008. So the data is evenly split around like a before and after. I typically don't factor in course redesigns because that's a very manual process. And even if I did know that there was a course redesign, it's not necessarily clear to me how you deal with that. The simple view is just, oh, throw out everything before the refit or the redesign. I'm not necessarily sure that you can afford to just throw away information like that as a one-size-fits-all rule. I wanted to get your perspective on, like, what does a redesign mean to you? How much can actually change? Do you know anything about this particular course that would make it like drastically different after a redesign? And maybe some thoughts on how to deal with this, at least definitely for this week, and if not, like some rules going forward.
Well, we're going to have an interesting podcast because I think putting doesn't matter that much
Okay.
this week because of the redesign. If you look at the most recent winners, you have all the donkey putters winning the tournament, like Keegan Bradley and Graham DeLette. Not that he won, but Graham DeLette has good course history here. So I guess we'll have a lot to talk about, but I don't know. I need to do a little bit more research on exactly what's happened with the putting specifically. But based on what I've seen from the recent design and who's done well here, and what other people are touting is that putting actually doesn't matter that much. They've talked about how the greens now are designed where everything kind of is shaped towards the hole, and the advantage that the great putters have is kind of mitigated with the course design or the redesign. So it's interesting. The one other thing too, we potentially have a lot of weather here, so we're recording this on Tuesday night, so make sure to pay attention to the weather because I think that could have a big impact. But the putting angle, we're on a little bit of a different page.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And if I had to pick whose page is probably right, it's probably yours, just because, like I said at the start, it's a very weak course fit. I said that up front. So I have and I really think that's a product of course fit essentially being run on two courses right now. And it's probably so weak because it's fitting to two different conditions. So given kind of what I don't like willy-nilly throwing out half of course history without a good reason to, but it sounds like I'd be better off kind of cutting the data in half and only looking at a post-refit for stuff like course fit and course history. So I'll probably rerun it again and seeing what pops, but it's good to know that you think putting is the wrong answer, because like if it still comes out putting at the end of that, I'll have a lot more questions.
That's interesting. I'm very curious what happens there, but just look at the history since that time, since I think it was 2007 or 2008 when the redesign happened. Look at the course history after that, and guys like Lucas Glover, Keegan Bradley, Graham DeLette have all had success, and those are notoriously awful putters.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I agree with all of that. So that's kind of all right. That's a good red flag to take into account.
And I need to do more. I'm going off what I've heard from other people who are touting and talking about this tournament. I've looked into a little bit of the data, and all the objective stuff that I'm looking at is just course history results, and I'm seeing some bad putters have good results. So I'm backing up what they've said, but by no means do I have a ton of conviction on that because I haven't, done all the research at this point. But I think it does make sense. I'm very curious to see what happens when you rerun things.
Yep, I'm looking forward to it too. This is an interesting test case.
All right, so we kind of mixed it up last time. What salary do you want to go first on? What salary do you want to go second on here? Because I do think we have interesting tiers when you dive into the golf.
Yeah, so you took top tier last time. I'll switch it up again. We'll go back to the usual. I'll take top tier. So top tier is an interesting one because course history is actually probably a very sensitive variable for me. So if you go back to kind of like my original change in approach I talked about at the beginning, some courses don't weight course history as much. The first thing that popped this week is do I lighten up or load up on course history is being weighted? And according to this, I lighten up. Now, I reserve the right to change my mind on that because apparently I'm like, the reason that I'd probably lighten up is because it's two different courses in the data set, the before and after. So maybe it all evens out and like I should weight it the normal amount. But if you weight it less, then that means that I basically don't think Dustin Johnson's elite course history matters as much as you might think. And I am not sold on this one yet. Again, I'm going to have to rerun it. It's tough to look at those numbers and say, like, all right, that probably just doesn't matter. But you still can point to a couple other examples. Even this tier, like Mark Leishman, who had pretty well elite course history, like or pretty very good course history going into it, and missed the cut last year. So it's not necessarily a guarantee. For the time being, I'm not weighting it that heavily. And so the only guys that I think that I'm really considering that I can squeeze into my lineup this week are Matt Kuchar and Brooks Koepka, who they have maybe just the right amount. And I think they're over. If I'm kind of defaulting to overall level being what I'm weighting the most, kind of long-term adjusted round type of stuff, their price points are probably cheap enough for like I can fit them in. Everyone else, like I think Jordan Dustin will do fine. I just don't like with the way I'm weighting course history, they're not going to do as great. Charlie Hoffman is a little bit overpriced to me, and yeah, everyone else is kind of like I can't find a way to fit him in or prefer him. So Kuch and Koepka are the only ones that are popping for me now. How's it looking on your end?
That's interesting. One thing I skipped, which is, again, we're missing Brian here, so I'm not as structured as normal, but just the course overall, it's a par 70. There's only 2 par 5s. Any other comments just really overall on the course, Colin?
Yeah, like the course overall, yeah, I'm still kind of deferring to like, all right, it's a very weak putting connection. Yeah, there's a par 70. One of my idle questions is if it's a par 70, then why does Dustin Johnson do so well year after year?
Great question.
What am I missing? So like maybe like I tend to like I don't look too hard like the par 70, 71, 72, even distance. Like I don't look at that should be borne out by stuff like course fit, but that's kind of my idle, like what am I missing here? There's nothing that, I mean, yeah, the weakness of the course fit is the only thing that jumps out at me. And again, like I just have to put everything at being super tentative until basically I rerun this with the second half of the course history. So right now, basically, like I'm going down to the basis of my decisions are basically long-term adjusted round type of stuff. And I think I probably rate Kuchar and Koepka long-term adjusted round wise probably better than their price does.
Right. So one interesting thing, and this is we can go into this a little bit, but basically my main cash game team, which it didn't really screw me, but last week I had Kuchar and Sergio, and I pivoted to Horschel and Matsuyama because Kuchar apparently didn't show up to play ping pong.
Yeah, the ping pong news. I was like, they can't.
It was very bizarre.
Yeah.
I had no idea how to handle that because Kuchar is known as like one of the best ping pong players alive. Like, there was the reality of that. Like, yeah, maybe he just cleans up against other PGA Tour guys, but like against other other ping pong professionals, he wouldn't stand a chance. Who knows? I mean, but he's clearly passionate about ping pong. He crushes everyone in the field and the PGA Tour, and he did show up to that. So I moved off of that, which maybe was a mistake. I have no idea. But what are your thoughts on that? I assume you saw that news.
Yeah, I stuck with it just because I feel like there have been enough times almost anecdotally in the past we hear like, oh, someone has the flu, someone's not feeling under the weather, and then they play on anyway.
Kuchar crushed.
Yeah, I feel like and maybe you see this in maybe like basketball is the only other comparison. One's like, oh, he's under the weather. Or like, do you move off of him? Like you've probably seen enough times like where like some shooting guard like has the sniffles or something, and like the sky is falling, and then he goes and like drops 50 or something. It happens enough that like I feel like the impact is probably not as high as people are giving it credit for. Like if there's truly something wrong, he would have withdrawn. Like I assume people don't withdraw from golf tournaments lightly. It's still a lot of money. And it's like, I'll play through the sniffles. Like
that's the players, biggest prize pool. And I think you're totally right. And I think the one adjustment that you can make if you're risk averse, which, might be, someone like me, like I have a lot of cash game action, I have a lot of tournament action. I think the right adjustment is, okay, Kuchar didn't show up. I'm not going to play him in tournaments, but I see on Twitter that every DFS analyst and every golf guy is off him. Perfect time to jump all in on him in tournaments.
Oh, easily. Yeah.
I think that's the adjustment that I'm going to make going forward is when we have these people, everyone gets, worried about them being sick or whatever is, okay, cash games, maybe I'll pivot, but when I pivot in cash games, I know that's X amount of volume. I have no exposure to them. It's time to go all in on tournaments and hope that because the news, everyone else is lower on that player, and you then get, a great player who may or may not be sick or may not have may or may not have a big problem, but now you have them at a much lower ownership, which gives you an advantage. And I think that's how I'm going to deal with it going forward.
Yeah, and like I thought about taking him off cash too. Like I didn't. I still don't know if that was a mistake or not. But like
I took him off cash, and I don't know if it's a mistake not taking him off. I think we're kind of in the same shoes. I mean, he had a great result, but we're both not results oriented.
Right.
We're trying to respect the process. Was it a good decision? I have no idea.
Right. I think it's still fun. I mean, like, I think the withdrawal, like the midterm withdrawals are the ones you truly don't see. Like what Furyk last year, I think, like what was one of those year-end tournaments where it's like he'd never withdrawn in 10 years and like his wrist bothered him. And
clearly,
everybody
was a huge issue, and it became a huge issue. So
yeah. I like for better or for worse, like again, that there's like I don't think in golf there's any like true killer option that you have to have in your lineup every week. That means that like you can always pivot and like you maybe lose like 1 or 3 expected like fantasy points. Like
it's small, but again, it's just you want to make the right decision. I agree with you.
Yeah.
And again, I think a lot of it comes down to personal preference and how much risk tolerance you have, because as the market gets more efficient in every DFS sport, there becomes a little bit more value. If there's something's close, you want to take the more contrarian guy, even in cash. But especially in tournaments. So.
Yeah, I think tournaments, it's a no-brainer.
Right. Okay. Well, going back to the high-end guys, the guys I was going to talk about were Dustin Johnson and Koepka. I actually do like Dustin. I'm buying the talent here. I'm buying the course history a bit. He has enough high of a count. I don't think he's ever missed a cut with his course history, which I'm really buying into. It is kind of weird that it's a par 70 course. There's not as many, 2 par 5s versus, the standard 4, which I think would hurt Dustin a lot, but I'm still buying it. Like Koepka a lot too, for the same reasons you mentioned. Also a little kind of weird. He's a bomber. You'd think the par 5s would really help him, but just works out. And I think that's because there's a lot of these long par 4s. I was reading a little bit about how some of these par 4s play almost 500 yards. So you do still need the distance, which makes sense for someone like Koepka and Dustin. So that's kind of the high-end guys that I like. I don't hate Spieth. I think a lot of people were on Spieth last week, and now they're not going to be on him as much. So it's kind of a perfect zigzag kind of spot, just like last week with Day, where everyone was on, Spieth and Rory, and no one was on Day, when in reality, Day had been playing exceptionally well. He won 6 out of the last 16 tournaments, and everyone was on Day for the Masters. And you just kind of realize how quickly people are, or how quick people are to kind of jump from, top course to another top course just based on, last week. What are your thoughts on that, Colin? Like Jason Day was the most touted golfer there was for the Masters, and then a couple weeks later, he's third wheel. What are your thoughts on that? I think there's an edge there for sure.
Yeah, I think that's why kind of one of the many reasons why I love long-term adjusted round in terms of he's still the top golfer in the world by any stretch. I think people do probably jump a little bit from in terms of who's the flavor of the week and just the willingness to disregard long-term history. I completely agree with that. Sawgrass, I still don't even feel bad about fading him for cash per se. Course history and a bad course fit. I don't feel bad about that at all. But especially in tournaments, one thing we don't really talk about a whole lot is quantifying upside, and just because golf distributions of fantasy points don't behave really nicely, so it's tougher to put in standard metrics. But he definitely just when he's in video game mode, then he's basically worth the price in terms of his upside in any given week. And as soon as you find a sweet spot with ownership, anytime you get him below 15-20%, it should just be have some exposure to him, just because you can go off of that much. I agree with that.
And I think that's one thing too that I've really learned over the last couple of months. Rory and Jason Day, the way DraftKings sets up their scoring, are just totally different golfers than everyone else. And I know there's a lot of subjectivity in guys getting hot and cold in the course, but just look at the data. Jason Day and Rory, when they get on, they'll throw together those 3 birdie streaks. They'll get eagles. They'll get birdies. I mean, they hit the ball so far, they hit the ball so high that when they're on, they can make a ton of birdies and eagles. And that's just the key on DraftKings. And, not to say that Spieth and Fowler and some of these guys can't do that, but they're not going to do it on the same level. And you can look back at the data that these guys do. And I think that's something that we have to constantly be aware of. in these tournaments is just the upside that someone like Rory and Day have, because if you look at like weighted birdies and things of that nature, they're different golfers than even some of these other elite guys that, Jordan Spieth, Fowler, even Stenson. So something to pay attention to, and I think you made a great point. Any other thoughts there, Colin?
No, I get like the only other one that I want to talk about is kind of Dustin Johnson, and that like I wouldn't necessarily argue with you on that one a whole lot. In the first run where I had course history at its normal weight, he found my way into a bunch of lineups. Like you could make the case that like, yeah, he does like fit it that well, and it really is in the second half type of thing. So I hate to be so tentative this week because, I gotta like rerun stuff, but I could like, again, like Dustin Moore depends on, it's two things. Like, is he that much better than everyone else there? And can you find enough value in the lower tiers to slot him into a bunch of your lineups? That's still
the price is interesting on Dustin this week. That's the concern, is the price.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I still like him. Like, don't get me wrong. It's just like, do you like him at that price? So right now I don't. I could just as easily change that. And yeah.
Okay. Well, we're on the same page there. I do want to say my one fade in this range, and we'll talk a little bit more. But Charlie Hoffman's played great. I know he's from Texas. I think a lot of people will be on him. It wouldn't shock me if he played exceptionally well here, but for that price, there's golfers in that range that I like a lot more than him. So if I'm going to take a stance on someone, it's going to be a fade on Charlie Hoffman this week. And it pains me to fade a Texas golfer, a guy from that area, but it is what it is. Moving to the mid-tier, this is where we get really interesting. There's a lot of guys that I think are intriguing here. Gary Woodland, I've heard a lot of people talk about. I had some insight that he was going through a swing change and he hasn't played well, but I'm still intrigued by him. Danny Lee, another guy who I think lives in the area now, has some course history here that I think is interesting. He's another guy that's I wouldn't say popping too much, but he's definitely popping a little bit for me, and I think he's an interesting pick. Ryan Palmer, who in the upcoming week, I think we're playing at his course, the course that he plays on the most in Texas. I took it last year, Colin, and all he needed was bogey or better on the 18th hole, and he put it in the middle of the fairway, had a wedge in, and made double bogey because he put it in the water. So I remember that, and that was like one of the weeks where I had 5 of 6 in the cash game. He makes it. It's just a huge swing, which is interesting. You play DFS and all these sports. You have a lot of equity on certain guys, but I feel like you have more equity on one person in golf more than any other sport. This week it was Griot for me. In other weeks, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But other guys who pop for me in this range, I think there's a couple guys that I'm intrigued by that I'm curious your opinion on, like Scott Piercy, people are talking about. I mentioned Danny Lee already. Keegan Bradley's in this range, who has exceptional course history here. I'm worried that he's fallen off as a golfer, but his course history is really hard to ignore. Colton Nost, I've heard people talk about. There's just a lot of guys. I'm kind of iffy on this range. Does anyone really stand out to you, Colin?
Yeah, I think just from an overall, I think the guy who's expected to be the best here is Ryan Palmer. And he is probably my ground zero case for what is going on with this course. So he's played this 11 years so far, and he has just sub 100 finishes for the first 5 or 6 years. And as soon as the redesign hits, it's like all top 20s.
Yeah, I buy that, by the way.
Yeah. So why?
I mean, if you look at his putting stats and some of these other things, I mean, everyone talks about how with the redesign, 2 putts are just a lot easier because everything breaks towards the hole.
So, like, basically his weakness is nullified type of thing?
Right. So some of these spots, like for instance, Graham Dillette, who I wanted to mention as well, these guys are prone to 3 putts, 4 putts in really bad spots where no one else is really doing that. And the way the course has been redesigned, these greens, everything kind of funnels towards the hole. So the mistakes and the, putts are, the consequences of them are not as bad. Like this last week at TPC on Saturday, if you miss a putt and you putt it the wrong way, it's rolling 15 feet by. Like you miss it on the wrong side, you're just gone. And now you made a long lag putt, and all of a sudden now you're fighting for your life to make another 2 putt. So that's, with the redesign, supposedly, again, I'll have to do more research. That's not going to happen as much of this course.
Okay, then like yeah, this is all leading towards like I'm gonna repeat myself 20 times for this past.
Almost opposite of
Like,
that.
yeah, I gotta refit everything, and I gotta look at the second half only. Other guys you mentioned. So the people that I agree with off the top of my head, Colt Knose and Scott Piercy and Ryan Palmer all have good line movement for me this week. Or just not even for me. They just have good line movement. I would agree with all of those. I think I was talking up Colt Knose last week
You
actually
were.
in terms of like I think he is Reeve-esque in terms of still underrated by the markets. I don't know about like outright winning the tournament, but I think he's better than his price indicates, and so far line movement kind of backs that. I think he's going to find my way in a bunch of the lineups. Other interesting guys kind of at the top of this tier for me, Charles Howell is still there. If you're basically willing to discount Sawgrass because like going in, he's the worst course fit in course history at Sawgrass, like ignore that. He still has a decent stretch of made cut to long-term adjusted round from this year. So like I think he's a decent like price in the lower 8,000s. Tony Finau is up there, who's kind of in the same spot where like he's volatile for sure, maybe not cash, but if you think distance actually is important in the redesign, he may pop even higher once I refit it. And then the other guy who I haven't seen stuff in forever is Harris English, who's right there. His interesting thing about like maybe while he'll get passed over by the public is like if you just look, how DraftKings has their scoring average there. He's something like 15 points below his contemporaries because he has one withdrawn round where he put up like a 6.5, and that counts apparently on his average. So I don't know how much the public makes the decisions in terms of like average fantasy points whenever DraftKings gives you, but like it's not a bad set of results this year. I don't think he's necessarily 7,500 bad. I think there's an argument for him. The other guy is kind of in that 7,000 range. There are two of them here. Anirban Lahiri, who I don't think like you don't like him at all, do you?
No, I'm intrigued by him. He's obviously the most successful Indian golfer I think ever, but yeah, he's just. I mean, sometimes he seems really too touted. This week he's kind of flying under the radar. I like that call. Love Harris English, by the way.
Okay,
He's
good to
a
know.
bad putter in general. So
Yeah, and then the other one that's kind of like a decent value range down at the bottom is Sean O'Hare, who I don't know. It just doesn't seem like he's a 7,000 kind of guy. And I feel especially tilted if Sean O'Hare is ever popping because my dad loves to roster him for even worse than your narrative reasons about like he saw some sob story about, oh, his dad ruined the game for him. And I really want to root for this kid. He's worse with Sean O'Hare than you are with Bryson. And I don't say that lightly. So I feel like I've failed as like a data person if Sean O'Hare ever pops. So like I don't say this lightly at all. But yeah, at 7,000, like he can definitely find his way in a couple lineups.
Well, I specifically didn't bring up Bryson for the same. I'm not gonna have him in cash this week. No Thunderdome for Bryson, but you better believe my tournament teams are gonna be long Bryson.
I can set my watch by it. I'm not worried.
Yeah. And it tilted me because one of the guys on ESPN or I can't remember, someone touted him, and I was just like, come on, let's all get off Bryson. I was too bullish on him initially, but like this is the time. He went to school at SMU. He's been around Texas a lot. Like any narrative I can find, I'm going to get behind, and I'm going to be stubborn on this one with Bryson. If I'm wrong, I'm going to be wrong, and I'm going to lose a lot of money. But if I'm even remotely close to right, hopefully he pays some dividends here at one of these tournaments.
Yeah,
I'm going to roster him this week, so we'll see. He's definitely in that range.
Yeah, the only other guy I want to talk about is Danny Lee because you mentioned him about like it is his home
he's from the area.
Yeah, so I think he lives in Irving, so it's like right by there. He's popping really low for me at his price, and maybe that's because I'm just not factoring home course in. But that kind of gets back to, and we've talked about this a couple of weeks, like how much of a boost percentage-wise would you really give someone for sleeping in their own bed? It's something. It's more than zero. But
it's something, and how much does he play the course? That's what I really want to know. And I did hear something that was so fascinating, and I wish you would have heard this, Colin, just on the Golf Channel. They're talking about, even with Sawgrass, like some of these guys are like, yeah, I play this course, 40 times a year, but when they get it ready for a PGA event, it's a totally different course. And it was a totally different course this year too. Like it was easier in the first couple of days, and then it turned into the hardest course they've ever seen on Saturday. So it's one of those things I tend to wait and I really like, but these PGA golfers even talk about, hey, I play this course, when it's set up for our members and it's set up for the public or whatever, like a couple, out of towner guys, whatever. But once it's set up for a PGA event, things change. So something I've probably overvalued in the past.
Yeah, I don't feel that's kind of the same way about like why I don't feel necessarily bad at not valuing it at all. Like how much could it really translate? Again, I think it's like I don't know, like, so yeah. So
out in course history, that's where I think the connection is. Like, this guy lives in the area and he's played this course exceptionally well. Okay, I can get behind that. But if he lives in the area and he hasn't played that, like well over a long sample, like, okay, clearly it doesn't matter that he lives there.
Yeah, I think if I had to guess as far as where does the edge come from, it's probably honestly sleeping in your own bed versus course familiarity for the reasons that you just outlined. That's the reason. That's the way I would have leaned before, and this kind of just pushes it extra in that direction.
That's fair. I think that's a really good point. All right, let's talk value, guys, because that is an interesting spot this week. There's some certain guys that definitely popped this week for cheaper golfers. And again, roster construction will be really important this week. Who are you liking this week that are
all right, who's showing up? Well, in a return to the usual spot, Ches Reavie is right there, 6,600.
Back in that sweet point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily big enough to make any decisions. I don't know. The value guys, I'm so far, if I don't weigh course history, then I'm leaning a lot more balanced this week. So I don't know how many of these guys I'll actually use. Another guy that's popping that I swear is making some cameo in some winning Thunderdome lineup, Adam Hadwin. I've never seen him on my radar before. I'm trying to figure out why he'd ever pop there. Who else is up here? Johnson Wagner is a guy that I've mentioned before. Same thing as Tom Hodge. Do we know his name yet? Hodge. I
just go with it. I didn't see it this week.
Yeah.
I think I'm getting better at the pronunciation stuff. Definitely not my strength in general, but I am watching every week, so hopefully I'll be able to pick up on that.
Yeah. So again, I know I've seen them before. Hudson Swafford is decently high here. I keep wondering if these are outliers or actual value plays, but I don't. It just kind of Spidey sense says I'm least confident in pure value at this first pass. There's nobody that jumps. And again, this is all depending on how weather shakes out. I actually did want to, because we didn't cover that explicitly. Did you see the forecast for Thursday yet?
Yeah, it's supposed to rain.
Yeah, so are they going to play, yes or no?
It's Tuesday. This is one of those things where I'm going to really wait till tomorrow. And again, I'll have my PGA model preview and I'll try to talk about weather more. But I know you guys want the data and you want the information, but we don't want to give you inaccurate information. Colin and I speculating on the weather on Tuesday night isn't going to help you that much either. So I think
no, not at all. It matters this week too, because your worst case is they don't play Thursday. The Friday Saturday temperature split is something like 4 or 5 degrees. I think there's a little bit wind kind of in the same direction. So if Thursday is a no-go for anybody, I think weather becomes doubly important this week. The problem is I have no idea how to handle are they going to play golf on Thursday? It's frustrating me to no end. I hate playing DFS in El Nino years. I guess that's what it comes down to.
All right. So I think we're on some of the same page, but one question I meant to ask you at the very top, how much Russell Knox did you have last week?
Not as much. So this bothers me.
You have seen that line movement.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing, right.
Regulation are off the charts. I've been bullish on him. The lines represent it, but I know the data didn't quite back him up in your approach. But or it was there, but it didn't pop as strong as the line movement and some of the stuff.
Right. So basically, it was the blocker for Russell Knox for me, and the reason I have more was JB Holmes. And I know I was open about is this a mistake? I don't know. He missed the cut by 1 stroke, so that wasn't exactly clarifying as far as as it was saying. I still don't know if that's bad luck or it was
so many people last week too, -1 Spieth.
Yeah, so I'm still kind of lost on whether or not Holmes was a mistake. But there were so many, that $200 difference between Knox and Holmes was all right, I can build so many more upper tier lineups with those extra $200. So is it worth? And I know he has better line movement, but Holmes had about half the line movement of Knox, and so it was just kind of one of those screw it. The numbers say I have them at the top of my spreadsheet, so I'll keep them. And I don't know if I could have used more discipline there to maybe like weight line movement a little bit more. I still don't necessarily know how to weight line movement versus what my model spits out. Like sometimes it's great as a tiebreaker, but like I'm willing to say that I'm missing something drastic. Like Knox could have been something that I'm missing really hard. I know like Sawgrass was his home course. I'm sure.
I think you were missing something at Knox last week. I really, and again, I tend to side, as much as I like to play devil's advocate and preach my narratives, the truth of the matter is I'm a data guy in general. And I be the first to admit, I think you know a lot more about the PGA data and just how to attack these things than I do. But I think at the end, I went almost all in on Knox. I mean, in tournaments, I faded Stenson, I faded Grillo, I faded Sergio. I never faded Knox, essentially.
I think I missed something on Knox too. Like, and that's the one that kind of scratching the head. Like, and that's the nice thing about line movement is it's like a safety net for what did I miss. The challenge is like what happens if your safety net runs up against a data-backed value play.
It's really close, and it's tough. And in general, I would advise most DFS players to go with what their stuff says, but I do think that line movement was overwhelmed. I mean, his line movement was bigger than anyone else last week, and we had both identified greens and regulation was a critical stat. I mean, he's a top 5 golfer in the PGA Tour in that regard. So that's the reason I got all in on him. And I'm not trying to say, hey, you should side with me here, but I do have a lot of.
No, I think like you're right on that one. I mean, it's like that's the one I struggled. Like he's the one that bothered me all week. Like, what did I miss? Should I have rearranged my lineups to squeeze in Knox? At what point is line movement so overwhelming that it's like, all right, I just have to plug him in no matter what?
Right. Okay. So again, pay attention to line movement, guys. We're kind of dancing around here without Brian. You mentioned a lot of cheap guys. It's a tough week at cheap guys. I mentioned that there's some guys who popped. I was going to mention Reeve. He's high in my model right now. Another guy who's high in my model is Chad Campbell, which I might throw out at this point. I assume he's not rating well.
I mean, he's okay. Like he's on the better half of the cheap guys, but like nothing outstanding.
Okay, so here's the guy who's going to be in a lot of lineups. I think is Scott Pickney. I think he's going to be in a ton of lineups. I think he has good course history here, and I think that he's just going to end up in a lot of lineups. So he's a guy that is rating really well for me at 6,300. I've seen him touted by other people as well. Does a really good adjusted round here. So he's a guy that's popping for me in the cheap range. We'll see what roster construction looks like at the end. One other comment real quick in terms of guys that are cheap. He's not quite in this range, but he's 100 off, and that's Will Wilcox. Please tell me you saw his hole-in-one.
Oh, the hole-in-one?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he got the Deadspin treatment, so that alone, you got to see it everywhere. So good for him. Apparently he used up all of his run good in a single hole, which like from a strategy standpoint, I don't know if that's great because like his Saturday was like a 10 over or something like that.
He got destroyed on Saturday. And anyone who got destroyed, Colin, I'm telling you, I had a lot of big sweats at that point. That's when I was like, okay, I have a lot of equity here. What's going to happen on Saturday? I watched the whole day. And it was absolutely ridiculous. Like these guys were putting, like someone would have an 8-foot putt for birdie. It seemed like they're in a great spot. The announcers were even saying, okay, this doesn't have too much break, and they'd put it 10 feet by. Like PGA pros don't do that. Like they don't fuck up like that. So
yeah, at that point, the course is wrong, not the pros.
Right, and everyone said that. Like the course it got out of hand. It just really. I mean, Zach Johnson, he's an epitome of a grinder. He doesn't shoot 80 anywhere. Like I'd love to look back and see where he shot 80 again relative to like. He just doesn't do that, and he shot 80 on that day. So I'm not waiting it too much, but yeah, I know Wilcox just completely fell apart.
Yeah. Well, no, one of the silly questions I forgot to ask you about, like did they do something specific to the course to make it difficult on Saturday? Or was that just
they had one of the, remember how we talked about the sucking systems for
the
green system? They had the same thing at TPC, and they sucked all the moisture out of the green, and they got the next day it was windy. And they had no humidity. So they were anticipating, the course guy talked about it, how they're anticipating humidity to kind of put moisture back into the greens, which they had Thursday and Friday. They had rain early in the week. They had soft conditions already, and they didn't take any of the moisture out of it. So everyone was just sitting on the green and it just stuck. So it was perfect condition for the players. They were just tearing it apart. So like, okay, we're going to dial it back. We're going to take all the moisture out of the greens. And they're hoping for a little bit more to be added throughout the day with the humidity, and it just didn't happen. So they sucked all the moisture out of him. And again, Miller talked about, I mean, he's the guy who's been on the PGA Tour. He's been announcing for whatever amount of time, 20 years. And he said he's never seen greens faster in his entire life.
Yeah, that is the outlier. I know. How many courses have that drainage system, do you know, where like they can just do that at will? Like even on like the regular tour, like I figured this has to be like what, fiber? Like you have to have super world-class drainage for.
Right, and it makes sense. I mean, this is a world-class course. Like obviously, Augusta, world-class course. TPC Sawgrass in Florida and Jackson. This is a world-class. This is a event and a course where one of the most famous holes in golf is 17. I mean, it is a tourist spot. It's a huge event. They run the players there. It has the biggest prize pool on the tour. Like, it is what it is. Obviously, they have it there, and I don't think they have the same quality of drainage system or something where they can, basically suck out the moisture out of the greens on demand around, other courses on the PGA Tour. I'm sure they have it some places. I just don't know where they are.
Yeah,
I would speculate that it's a lower percentage, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. Any other comments just on the low tier guys? Kind of.
No, I think the guys you named are like, yeah, I don't hate any of those. And again, like I just gotta put the caveat out there again. Like this is, I have pretty much zero weight on course history this so far. Maybe
I would definitely run that back. I think other people too. I think it's important to look at the course history, and I think it's important to look at since they changed the course. And that's something where you just have to identify it. Other courses don't have this, this variable where they've changed the greens, they changed things completely. And I do think it matters this week.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's definitely not something you can pick up from the data. You can see something's off from the data, but then maybe that's like, okay, I need to go investigate it. So as a rule of thumb though, I don't like cherry picking which past results to use. That'll get you in more trouble than it's worth. Oh, yeah. But like this just seems to be a clear cut. This is two different courses.
Right. And I agree with you completely. I think people in general, they want to have confirmation bias, right? They want to cherry pick things that fit their narrative. And I'm certainly guilty of that. And I think you've helped me a lot in that regard. But from everything I've read, and again, this could change and I will, adjust my model. The one nice thing for you guys, I'm going to talk to Colin, in the next 24 hours before I put this video out and try to figure out exactly what's going on here. But I'm very curious to see what spits out after you rerun the data. In terms of roster construction and just and how you're thinking about things, does anything stand out to you, Colin, for this week?
Right now, it's balanced so far. I think I don't necessarily think, absent weather, there's just not enough value in the lower tiers that I'm super confident about. I'd lean balanced over stars and scrubs. Again, all of this is subject to change, like for the reasons we outlined. But and also in terms of ownership, like I really wonder what Spieth's ownership is going to over under 15% in like the birdie.
Spieth can be a great play. Again, he's from the area. He's a huge Cowboys fan. He has a house here. Last year, I think he let Justin Thomas and Lovemark stay at his place. This is a classic bounce back spot. I have no idea his ownership. I do like him for tournaments, but again, I would love him even more if I knew his ownership was below 20%. One last golfer before we end it. I spent a little bit of time on him, but he currently is the #1 golfer in my model. That's Lucas Glover. What are your thoughts on him in general?
Lucas Glover, he's there at 7,500. I don't like there. I'd probably prefer maybe like 3 or 4 guys above him right now. And I think that's because he's a bomber, right? Where's he at?
He's a little bit of a bomber. He's just been playing really, really well lately. And again, the knock on him is this putting. And if you talk to a lot of people, it's just like he's incredible ball strike.
Yeah, that's it. I always give him bonuses like in places where putts don't matter. If you believe that actually is true for this course, then I could see him coming back and having a stronger course fit. The only devil's advocate that I'd say for maybe discount him a little bit is his best finish was at Wells Fargo, where he has elite course history. So depending on if you how much does that factor in versus how does that generalize, that's maybe why I have him slightly less.
Okay, that's fair. He's been good recently, 5 straight made cuts. He is more expensive than he has been in the past, so that's one reason I don't like him as much.
Yeah, he's not overwhelming to me at 7,400 by any stretch.
Okay. I've seen him touted elsewhere, so I just wanted to bring him up. I'm surprised he's the #1 guy in my model, given what I know about this tournament. But he is right now number one. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll see what happens when I adjust things. Any final thoughts, Colin, before we finish the pod?
No, I guess I'll try to do a follow up and maybe like tweet it out or something like that. Like what's the, what looks different after a second half fit or something like that. But this is an interesting kind of test case for like not all course history is created equal. And this is how the sausage is made. This is how we're going to go about cracking it, like testing hypotheses and kind of figuring out how to weight it under what conditions and asking questions like we've been doing this whole hour.
Right. And just to finalize there before we end the pod, I think this week more than most weeks, and any week that I can actually remember, you really want to get all the weather data you can up until the last minute, because that could be huge, especially at a course where we don't say, hey, we know exactly what type of golfer we want. Two, look at the course history stuff. I think Colin, again, I'm leaning on him big time. I'm going to see what happens, when he reruns things. I think it'll be really interesting to see what the data looks like when we look at the course history based on just, the years after the redesign. And then finally, this is a great tournament week. I mean, the players are so watched and people have such strong opinions off that. It's a bigger week in general for DFS. So I think there's opportunities to capitalize on recency bias with some of these guys and definitely take advantage of that. Dustin Johnson really didn't show up. I think he could show up big time this week. Speed we talked about already. And there's some other guys that I think will be interesting. So hope you guys have a great week. Colin, you want to end the show?
Yep. Take care, you guys, and we'll figure out course history for you next week. It'll all be wrapped up by then. So, all right, take it easy.